What's up, geeks and gamers? It's Odin coming back with a box office breakdown where this weekend we saw the release of Black Adam, which got completely panned by the critics, and yet the audiences are showing up to support this movie. And though it's not the most impressive opening weekend of the year or even for superhero films in general, it is definitely a lot better than what many were expecting this film to actually make. As far as the domestic numbers are concerned, they were projecting the film to get just about $60 million. That was kind of like the hope, saying, it's going to hope to get to $60 million. Well, it ended up making a little bit more than just that, and also had a decent showing internationally as well in the markets that it's currently available in. And so what does that mean? Well, it means that it still has a ways to go, as this film cost quite a bit of money, but it is definitely in a good starting spot for its ability or for the chance to make its money back. We really won't know until next weekend when we get those week 1 to week 2 drop-offs, especially in the international market, because I honestly think that this film is going to be a much larger international sensation versus the domestic for this film. And that seems to be pretty, common amongst the films that are put out by The Rock. He seems to do a little bit okay sometimes in the domestic market, but does a lot better, sometimes double or triple the amount of money in the international. And so I think the international is going to ultimately be the deciding factor for whether or not this movie makes its money back or not. With a $200 million budget, this film needs to make roughly $500 million to hit its break-even point, and $140 million, definitely a good start, but could definitely also have been a bit better. So possibly the word of mouth on this film, which is, mixed to positive from what I have gathered, it might just be enough to push this film to that point. So as you can see right now, according to Deadline, it has made $140 million in its international debut. It has made $73 million from 76 markets, so it is available in the vast majority of international markets. So once we get our projections next week, those are likely to be very reliable, as they tend to not be reliable if it has a slower rollout internationally. But with 76 markets, that is already a pretty high number of the markets available. So we're really going to be depending on how much does it continue to make from week to week. Does this film cap out at around $400 million, which is what a lot of other films that have started off with this amount have made? Or is it able to have stronger word of mouth and stronger legs to the point of it pushing it even past that $400 million mark to closer to the $500 million mark? We'll have to, of course, wait and see. But as it says right here, that it made a $67 million domestic start with $73 million in the international, making its total around $140 million, and that is the estimate. We'll get the actuals in the next couple of days. It says the offshore debut is at the high end of the range we saw coming into the weekend. The domestic can also be said the same thing, while worldwide it is slightly ahead. Dwayne Johnson's star was number one in the vast majority of its overseas openings, and the top U.S. title in each of them. In like-for-likes, then using today's exchange rates, the start is tracking 27% ahead of Shazam. Now, it's important for us to, I think, mention Shazam, because if we go back to Shazam, going back here to my website, ombReviews.com, I believe that would have been a film that I would have been tracking. Maybe it would not have been, but we'll go ahead and dive into the numbers, and we'll do a comparison just to show you how close this movie is going to be to that film. And if it sticks ahead and stays 27% ahead, what does that mean for the film as far as its likely total by the end of its run? So I guess you see Black Adam standing at the top of the box office with $67 million at over 4,000 screens, $15,000 per screen, so a very, very high number there. Be interesting to see what kind of drop-off we see next weekend, because there's not going to be a whole lot of competition for this movie up until really mid-November, when we finally see Wakanda Forever come out, which is projected to also have a pretty massive global opening as well. Ticket to Paradise is a newer film from Universal, at least for the domestic. It actually had a slow release and a long-term release internationally, where it actually accrued quite a bit of money. Starting off $16.3 million is definitely a lot stronger than I think anyone would have suspected for this movie, but because of the fact that the film has made almost the entirety of its money so far internationally, meaning all that it has left really is domestic, word of mouth is going to be a very big factor on this one, because despite the fact that it's close to $100 million worldwide at this point already, it still needs to make a little bit of extra money in order for it to hit its break-even point, as its budget was around $60 million. Smile dropped the number 3 spot, but continuing to hang around. 34% drop in the 4th week of release, $8.3 million, so that film continues to do well. There's a chance of that. I think, honestly, there's a good chance of that film getting very close to $100 million domestic, which is just downright impressive for this movie, as the word of mouth continues to be very strong on it. Not very strong word of mouth. In fact, incredibly low, and I think I would argue very poor word of mouth, is Halloween Ends, which in its 2nd week of release saw an 80% drop. Now, there's a couple of factors here at play. For one, it has its day and date release on Peacock, so it's already available for people to watch if they have a Peacock subscription. But also, that 80% number is just downright insane. I mean, we don't typically see high numbers like that. We sometimes do. But yeah, it takes a really bad movie also to get that kind of number there. It means that people are either saying, I don't care about this movie at all to go see, or I would much rather watch it at home versus actually going out to the theater to go see it instead. It's really not that great of a movie, and so I can't really blame anybody for kind of rejecting this movie. The fact that they have not changed the theaters, though, something tells me with an 80% drop, next weekend, we're probably going to see the film's theater counts get cut in half if I had to make a guess, because that is just abysmal numbers there. It still was able to make its money back opening weekend, so it's still adding nonstop, basically it's just not, it's nothing but profit from this point going forward. However, it is still a massive drop nonetheless, and just because you make money and just because you're profitable doesn't make your film good, just like the same is true. If you don't make your money back, doesn't mean necessarily that you're a bad movie. La La Crocodile continuing to hang around with 43% drop there, but still has a long ways to go to break even. The Woman King is now starting to see some pretty big drops, so a 50% drop here domestically. It is also slowing down enough. It only added another about $4 million worldwide this past weekend, and so as I said, I think that the international release for this movie had basically been the one chance it had to make its money back. Based off of the numbers that we're seeing right now, though, I would say that its chances of getting to that number is almost zero. I think The Woman King is basically guaranteed to be a box office flop, which of course makes me and anyone who knows anything about the actual history of the Dahomey Kingdom and also the propaganda that's been pushed by the people involved with the project, it makes anyone who knows any of that quite happy. A Bloody Disgusting, yes, that's right, that's the distributor, production of Terrifier 2 is doing okay in a very domestic, or rather a very small limited release. Don't Worry Darling has dropped to the number 8 spot, dropping 61%. As you can see, it's being basically abandoned by Warner Brothers, and even with that being the case, it is only about 2 million or so out from its break even. Probably needs to make closer to 4 million in the next few weeks if it's going to hit at that point. But needless to say, the chances of this film breaking even are still very high because it just has so little to make by the end of its run. So I still would not be surprised if this film just barely got to its break even, or if anything was just slightly below or slightly above its break even point based off of the numbers that we're continuing to get 5 weeks out from release. Number 9 spot goes to Amsterdam, which dropped another 70%. This film is a massive financial failure. And then number 10 is The Triangle of Sadness, which is a new independent film, it looks like. Black Adam worldwide, $140 million. As you can see right there, the domestic international numbers are quite close, but I would not be surprised if this film caps out somewhere around $125 or so million domestically, and I think it has a lot higher chance of doing even better internationally. That just tends to be the way things go for the movies that Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson actually does. It's going to be interesting to see how this film does in the second week of its release. Coming out in a large amount of markets, as you can see, it has come out already in major markets like United Kingdom, Mexico, Brazil, Australia, France, and so some might try to point out, well, maybe it's still going to have a chance because Japan doesn't come out till December, but you can only really guarantee so much money from Japan, so the chances of that being the make or break for this movie are not nearly as likely. I think the big question is, are they going to be able to schedule a release of this film in China? Because this film currently does not have a China release date on the books. Warner Brothers has never been shy about doing work with them in the past, and so it would not surprise me if they were able to actually do that. If they were, I think that absolutely could be a guarantee of this film making its money back. But I think that there's still a chance of this film being able to do so even without China, which of course would be the preferable thing, because who wants to see a studio continue to support the Communist Party there? It just doesn't make any darn sense. Ticket to Paradise, as I mentioned, had already made around $70 or so million before this weekend, and so now you're looking at the domestic and international getting very close to $100 million, but... and that's the big but, right, is that the international numbers have been out for a while now, right? It's been, slowly releasing internationally, and so it's probably made about as much as it's going to make internationally at this point. So the big question is, are the names of George Clooney and Julia Roberts, and also is the film even any good? Is that going to be able to push this film to profitability territory? We'll have to wait and see. Smile is continuing to do very well, has a chance not only of making $100 million domestically, but yeah, even an outside chance of getting to $200 million internationally, which would be quite impressive. Halloween ends at $82 million. Again, pretty much dropping out of existence as far as most of the markets are concerned. So we'll have to wait and see on that one as far as just how close to or past how much past $100 million does it make worldwide? Does it even get to that point? With 80% drops, yeah, things don't look all that good for it. But hey, because it didn't spend that much money on the film, you still made your money back, so I guess good for you. La La Crocodile only at $36.4 million, really not a whole lot there. Woman King at $82.8 million, as I said, pretty much has reached the end of its run. The international numbers have not come in for this movie, and even though this film might still have some countries yet to be released in, which again, theoretically, you could argue there might be a chance there. For instance, Italy, it doesn't release until December. Spain, it does not release until November. So there's still some countries there that could potentially continue to push this film forward, but is it going to be enough to make up the $25 or so million it still has left? At this point, I would say probably not. Don't Worry, Darling is at $82.8 million. So again, this film, other than its opening weekend, has really not done much of anything, but the opening weekend was just enough, and it's made just enough every single week for the chance of it making its money back to still, at the very least, be on the table. Amsterdam, not even close. This film, complete and utter failure, and that's what happens when you put just names on your poster and try to sell it just based on names and not on actual stories. And hey, you're going to look at about a $100 million loss for this actual movie. Going to my website, ombreviews.com, for some box office tracking based off of right now that $140 million opening for Black Adam. As you can see, it's looking right now at a $216 million loss. It's just came out, so the chances of it cutting that in half at the very least is very likely, but it has a long way to go. Again, that $200 million budget, it's going to be a massive weight around the neck of this movie. The positive thing and the good thing that can be said is that it looks like it's just another one of those movies that shows the critics don't mean anything anymore, right? The critics pan this film nonstop, and yet the film is doing better than what any of the box office so-called experts had said that the film was actually going to do. And so the fact that audiences are definitely taking a much more positive approach to this movie, at the very least, is a slap in the face and showing us truly that the age of the critic meaning anything has long since been dead. And I think that movies like this continue to show why critics' opinions just don't matter anymore. Still has a ways to go, so that second weekend number is going to be huge, but we'll have to wait and see. Ticket to Paradise, as I had mentioned, is now at $98.6 million after having a slow release internationally. Still $30 million in the red, though, so it still has a ways to go for it to break even because of its budget of $60 million. The break even for it is roughly $150 million. So we'll have to wait and see on that. We do have some estimates now for Halloween Ends, because even though it dropped 80% in its second week of release, it's still projected to make somewhere between 117 and 164 million max. There's no way it's getting to that 164. We're looking something closer to 117 and maybe even lower than that when you're dropping that much. But because, again, the break even was only $50 million, that means the projected profit is somewhere between 40 and 68 million by the end of its run. At $82 million, it's currently at 19 million in the black. So hey, that's what happens when you make a film for very little money. It's something that Hollywood really needs to start learning that lesson from. Amsterdam, with only $21.8 million worldwide, is at $106 million in the red. Not likely to get that much further than that. So you're looking at a film that could end up being well over $100 million as far as financial losses are concerned. Smile continues to be massively profitable, 166.2, almost doubling what it made in the first 2 weeks of its release. So $74 million in profit is looking pretty darn well for that movie. As far as any other updates are concerned, as you can see, Woman King is still $25 million in the red. So even though, as I mentioned, it is doing well and compared to its first 2 weeks because of the slow rollout internationally, it still has to make $25.2 million back. And there's really not a whole lot left for this film to be able to make because, yeah, you got a couple of countries maybe that could throw a couple $1 million this way, but the fact that it's only made $4 million between this week and last week, and again, the previous week you were seeing it closer to 10 to 15 million it was adding. That's the reason why I said last week there's still a chance. At this point, I just don't see any chance for this film to be able to do anything, anything positive. Whereas Don't Worry, Darling, as I mentioned, is at 2.7 million in the red, so the chances of that film making its money back much, much higher. But what are the thoughts about the numbers? Do you think Black Adam is any good? Were you able to see it? And also, do you think it's going to be a surprise hit success? I mean, we could very well see that. We saw something similar when it came to when it came to the release of Top Gun Maverick, where the film actually had it had a decent release, and it was because of very strong legs that the film made as much as it did. If we go ahead and go back to this other chart down here, we can actually try to pull up that number to give a better understanding of where this film is standing in comparison. So even though the film is again not going to be making Top Gun Maverick numbers, Top Gun Maverick opened at $248 million and saw one of the lowest drops in history with only like 13% of a drop and made $557 million by the end of its second week. So that's why this film ended up making well over $1 billion, even well over the projections because the legs on the film were so strong. We're looking at a very different scenario here with the $140 million for Black Adam, because if we look at any other films that have made about that amount of money, even films that did, ended up doing well at the box office, you have to understand, right? The last really $140 million film was Sonic the Hedgehog 2. That film ended up around $399 million, so still ended up around $400 million, but because of a much smaller budget, it was actually able to make about $100 million in profit. We're not going to see that same situation. So if we're seeing similar drops in civil numbers to Sonic the Hedgehog 2, then it is not going to be looking good at all for Black Adam. But again, audiences can always change things. So let me know your thoughts if you think the audience and the audience reactions to this movie, because again, some of it's been positive, some of it's been mixed though. And so I think that because of that, somewhere in the middle crowd, you might see this film drop somewhere between 50 and 60% still by next weekend. And if that's the case, that means that this film is looking more look like the release of Sonic the Hedgehog 2, which saw very similar drop-offs. And that means that this film is going to be yet another massive financial loss for Warner Brothers, which has just had nonstop financial losses the last couple of years. And so we'll have to wait and see, though. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button, lap that fire button, and honestly, and smash the little rumble button. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, a blessed Sunday. And as always, God bless.